A racist white woman humiliates a black man on a plane, and she is shocked to discover the real identity of the black man. Tom Johnson stepped onto Flight 287 and looked down the aisle. The cabin was already buzzing with activity as passengers tucked bags into overhead compartments. He maneuvered past a few travelers still standing, muttering a polite, "Excuse me," as he made his way toward his seat near the emergency exit. A few rows back, Karen White watched Tom over the top of her magazine. She had noticed him the moment he boarded, his calm demeanor catching her attention. Her eyes followed his movements as he settled into his seat and checked his bag. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something about him seemed off. Her fingers drummed nervously on the armrest as she pretended to read the article in front of her, though she hadn't processed a single word. "Excuse me," Karen said quietly, raising a hand as Linda, the flight attendant, passed by. Linda paused, a polite smile on her face. "Yes, ma'am? How can I help you?" Karen glanced briefly at Tom, who was now flipping through the pages of his book. "That man near the emergency exit," she said in a low voice, leaning slightly toward Linda. "Is it really safe to have someone like him sitting there?" Linda followed Karen's gaze. Tom was sitting quietly, absorbed in his book. Linda's smile never faltered. "I assure you, ma'am, everyone on board has gone through security. Our seating arrangements comply with safety regulations." Karen's lips tightened. "I just thought, you know, with everything you hear on the news these days, it's better to be cautious, isn't it?" Linda's polite smile stayed in place, though her eyes narrowed slightly, almost imperceptibly. "If there's anything specific you're concerned about, please let me know. We want all our passengers to feel safe and comfortable." She nodded politely and continued down the aisle. Karen watched Linda walk away, irritation flickering in her chest. How could the flight attendants be so dismissive? She shook her head and returned her gaze to Tom, who had put his book down momentarily and was now reaching into his bag. Her mind started racing. What was he looking for? What could he be hiding? She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, unable to tear her eyes away. Tom, unaware of the attention, pulled out his medication and checked the label. He tucked it back into the bag after a moment, then resumed reading. He could feel the calm washing over him, slowly distancing himself from the stress of the week. He didn't notice the tension slowly building behind him. Linda moved down the aisle, continuing her pre-flight checks. As she reached the back of the plane, she exchanged a glance with her colleague Jim. She leaned in closer and whispered, "Keep an eye on seat 18C. The passenger in 22A seems a little agitated about him." Jim nodded. "Will do. What's the issue?" Linda shrugged lightly. "Nothing specific. Just one of those gut feelings, I guess." She tried to brush off the unease. She'd been on enough flights to recognize the signs of trouble brewing, but it was too early to tell if this was one of those cases. Karen shifted again in her seat, her eyes narrowing as she continued to watch Tom. The plane engines began to hum louder, signaling that takeoff was imminent. Tom put his book away and looked out the window, his face a picture of calm. Karen's mind, however, was anything but. She tightened her grip on the armrests, trying to shake the sense of foreboding that had settled in her chest. As the plane taxied down the runway, Karen leaned back, but her gaze never left Tom. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and if no one else was going to do anything about it, she might just have to take matters into her own hands. The plane leveled off after takeoff, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone on board and giving a brief overview of the flight plan. The seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers began to settle into their routines. Some pulled out laptops, while others opted for in-flight movies or books. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking on passengers and offering refreshments. Tom Johnson sat back in his seat, glancing out the window at the clouds rolling past. He felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. He reached down, unzipped his carry-on bag, and took out a small water bottle. As he did, he noticed Karen in his peripheral vision, her eyes fixed on him. He paused for a moment, then dismissed it, assuming she was just glancing around like many others. A few rows behind, Karen's discomfort only grew. She watched as Tom carefully zipped his bag back up after taking out the water bottle. What was he hiding in there? The way he kept checking the bag, as if to make sure its contents were secure, seemed suspicious to her. She glanced around at the other passengers. Most were engaged in their own worlds, oblivious to what she saw as a potential threat. Unable to shake the feeling of unease, Karen signaled for Linda, the flight attendant. Linda, noticing the raised hand, approached with a friendly smile. "Yes, ma'am? Is there something you need?" Linda asked, keeping her tone light and professional. Karen leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, trying not to draw attention. "That man up there, The one near the emergency exit. I've been watching him. He keeps checking that bag of his, like he's nervous about something inside it. I really think you should look into it. Linda glanced toward Tom, then back to Karen. Her expression remained calm. I understand your concern, ma'am, but as I mentioned before, unless there's a clear indication of something amiss, we can't inspect other passengers' belongings without reason. He hasn't caused any disruption, and his behavior appears normal. Karen's face tightened. Normal? How can you say that? People like him, they always act normal until they don't. I've seen it on the news. We can't just sit here and do nothing. What if there's something dangerous in that bag? Linda maintained her composure, her training kicking in. We have security measures in place, ma'am. Everyone on this flight has gone through screening. Please try to relax and enjoy the flight. If you notice anything more concrete, let us know. Karen huffed, crossing her arms. You people never take things seriously until it's too late, she muttered under her breath. Linda heard the comment but chose not to respond. She gave Karen a polite nod and continued down the aisle, trying to shake off the conversation. Her years of experience taught her to handle such situations with caution, but this was starting to feel different. There was a certain intensity in Karen's eyes, a determination that made Linda uneasy. Linda walked past Tom's seat, casting a quick, casual glance at him. Tom, feeling the brief shift of attention, looked up and met her eyes. Linda smiled politely, and he nodded in return, the moment passing without words. She couldn't pinpoint why Karen's concern felt so pressing. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered a nervous or suspicious passenger, but something about this situation nagged at her. Karen watched Linda walk away, feeling frustrated and unheard. She looked around at the other passengers, some of whom had glanced her way during the exchange. They had returned to their own activities, seemingly unbothered. Karen's annoyance deepened. How could everyone be so complacent? She leaned over to her neighbor, a middle-aged woman engrossed in a magazine. Excuse me, Karen whispered. Did you notice that man near the exit? Doesn't he seem off to you? The woman glanced up, surprised by the sudden question. She looked over at Tom, who was now reading his book again. I don't know, she replied hesitantly. He looks fine to me. What's the problem? Karen frowned, feeling a flicker of irritation at the woman's nonchalance. He's been acting suspicious since we boarded. Keeps checking his bag like he's hiding something. I tried telling the flight attendant, but they don't seem to care. Isn't it better to be safe than sorry? The woman glanced again at Tom, then back at Karen. Maybe, but I think if there was really a problem, the crew would handle it. I'm sure it's nothing, she said, turning back to her magazine. Karen clenched her jaw, frustration building. It was clear to her now. If no one else was going to take this seriously, she would have to. She kept her eyes on Tom, determined not to let him out of her sight. She watched every movement, waiting for any sign that would justify her concerns. Tom, oblivious to Karen's scrutiny, continued reading, occasionally taking a sip of water. He was content, lost in his book. The steady hum of the plane's engines was a comforting backdrop. His mind drifted, thinking about his upcoming meeting in Los Angeles, the case he was working on. He had no idea that just a few rows behind him, someone's growing suspicion was about to turn into something much more disruptive. Karen's unease grew with every passing minute. Her mind replayed news stories and events, each adding weight to her fears. She felt her pulse quicken, convinced that danger was close. She would wait, watch, and be ready. If Tom made one wrong move, she would be the first to act. The cabin of Flight 287 was filled with the usual sounds of a long-haul flight. The hum of the engines, the rustle of pages turning, and the occasional clink of a drink cart. Most passengers were relaxed, either lost in their in-flight entertainment or dozing off. But Karen White's eyes remained fixed on Tom Johnson, her irritation and suspicion growing by the minute. Every time Tom reached down to check his bag, Karen's anxiety spiked. She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, her thoughts racing. This wasn't normal. Nobody checked their bag that often unless they had something to hide. She felt a responsibility to act, but each time she considered confronting him directly, she hesitated, unsure of the reaction she might provoke. Unable to stay quiet any longer, Karen leaned over to the elderly man sitting next to her. "Excuse me," she whispered, trying to keep her voice down. "Have you noticed the man sitting near the emergency exit? He keeps checking his bag. Doesn't that seem suspicious to you?" The elderly man looked up from his crossword puzzle, squinting through his glasses. He glanced in Tom's direction, but quickly returned his focus to his puzzle. "I hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary," he said dismissively. "I'm sure it's nothing." Karen's frustration mounted. How could everyone be so blind? She looked around, hoping to catch the eye of another passenger. She needed someone to validate her concerns, to see what she saw. Her gaze landed on a young woman sitting across the aisle, who seemed to be watching Tom with a hint of curiosity. Karen leaned over, speaking in a hushed tone. "Excuse me, do you see that man near the exit? Doesn't he seem off to you? Like he's hiding something?" The young woman glanced at Tom, then back at Karen. Her expression was polite but uninterested. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I think he's just reading. Is there something wrong?" Karen's patience snapped. "Yes, there is. He's been acting strange since we boarded. Keeps checking that bag of his like it's got something dangerous in it. I've told the flight attendant, but no one's doing anything about it." The young woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Maybe it's best to leave it to the flight crew. They're trained for this kind of thing, right?" Karen's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from other passengers. "What if it's too late by then? What if something happens and we could have prevented it? I'm not the only one who feels this way." Her tone was firm, trying to rally support from those around her. A few passengers turned to look at Tom, who remained unaware of the attention. He continued reading, his posture relaxed. Linda, the flight attendant, noticed the growing number of heads turning and moved toward Karen's seat. She leaned down, her voice low but firm. "Ma'am, I need you to keep your voice down. We don't want to disturb other passengers. What seems to be the problem?" Karen gestured toward Tom, her expression set in determination. "I've been telling you, that man is acting suspiciously. He's checking his bag over and over. He's up to something, I know it." Linda took a deep breath, maintaining her professionalism. "Ma'am, I've spoken with you about this before. We cannot interfere without concrete evidence of a threat. If you could please calm down, I assure you we are monitoring the situation." Karen's voice grew louder, cutting through the cabin noise. "Monitoring? What does that even mean? You're just going to sit back and wait until something terrible happens? That's not good enough." Passengers started to murmur, some looking concerned, others irritated. Tom finally looked up, sensing the shift in atmosphere. His eyes met Karen's for a moment, a look of confusion crossing his face. Linda noticed the attention Karen was drawing and knew she had to de-escalate quickly. "Ma'am, I understand you're concerned, but raising your voice and alarming other passengers isn't going to help. Please lower your voice or I'll have to ask the captain to get involved." Karen stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "No, you don't understand. You're all blind. Something is wrong and I'm not going to sit here and do nothing." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the cabin's relative quiet. More heads turned, whispers spreading among the passengers. Linda placed a hand on Karen's arm, trying to guide her back into her seat. "Ma'am, please sit down. Let's talk about this calmly." Karen shook Linda's hand off, pointing directly at Tom. "He's hiding something. I demand that his bag be searched right now." Tom's eyes widened slightly. He looked around at the gathering crowd and then back at Karen. Calmly, he closed his book and set it on his lap. His voice was measured, not rising to meet Karen's accusation. "Ma'am, I assure you there's nothing dangerous in my bag. I'm just trying to have a peaceful flight like everyone else." Karen's eyes were blazing with indignation. "Peaceful flight? You expect us to believe that? What are you hiding in there?" Linda stepped between Tom and Karen, her voice firm but calm. "Okay, that's enough. We're not going to have this discussion here. Please, ma'am, take your seat. Sir, thank you for your patience." She turned to address the other passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. There is no cause for alarm. Please return to your seats." The murmurs in the cabin grew louder, and Linda knew she needed to get Karen under control before the situation escalated further. She motioned for another flight attendant to assist. Together, they gently but firmly guided Karen back into her seat. Karen continued to protest, her voice a low but angry mutter. Tom stayed seated, his face unreadable. He watched as Karen was finally seated, her eyes still locked on him with distrust. He could feel the tension in the air, but he kept his composure. He knew better than to engage, especially with so many eyes on them. Instead, he picked up his book, flipping to where he left off, and began reading again, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the turmoil around him. Linda, now at the front of the cabin, gave the passengers another reassuring smile, then moved to the galley to contact the captain. She needed to inform him of the situation, just in case it escalated further. As she picked up the intercom phone, she cast a quick glance back at Tom, who appeared relaxed, and Karen, whose eyes were still burning with suspicion. She sighed. It was going to be a long flight. The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin, but the tension was palpable. Passengers exchanged nervous glances, some whispering, others pretending to focus on their books or screens. Karen sat in her seat, fuming. She couldn't understand why no one was taking her seriously. She glanced around, catching snippets of conversation. They were all talking about her. She could feel it, but it didn't matter. She knew she was right. Karen's eyes flicked back to Tom. He was reading calmly, unbothered by the scene she had caused. His calmness irritated her even more. How could he sit there so calmly if he wasn't hiding something? Her thoughts churned. If no one else would act, she would have to take matters into her own hands. Tom shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of Karen's gaze. He glanced up briefly, catching her staring at him. Her eyes were narrowed, her jaw set. He knew that look well. It was the look of someone convinced they had uncovered a threat, someone who wouldn't back down. He sighed quietly, turning back to his book, but he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse. Karen couldn't stand it anymore. Her patience snapped. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, making her way down the aisle toward Tom. Passengers turned to watch as she moved, her steps quick and purposeful. Tom looked up, sensing her approach. He set his book down on his lap, meeting her eyes. "You!" Karen's voice was loud, cutting through the soft murmurs of the cabin. "I want to know what's in that bag right now." She pointed directly at Tom, her finger trembling with anger. Tom stayed calm. "Ma'am, there's nothing in this bag that concerns you," he said evenly, his voice low. "Please sit down. You're causing a scene." Linda rushed down the aisle, her face a mask of concern. "Ma'am, please, you need to return to your seat," she said, placing a gentle hand on Karen's arm. "You're disturbing the other passengers." Karen shook Linda off, her focus entirely on Tom. "No, I won't sit down until he opens that bag. I know he's hiding something dangerous. I'm not going to let this plane be in danger because you're all too blind to see the truth." Tom looked at Linda, who was trying to keep her composure. He could see the worry in her eyes, the fear that things were spiraling out of control. He kept his voice calm, controlled. "Ma'am, my bag only contains personal items. I promise you there's nothing here that's a threat to anyone." Karen laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Promises? You think we should just take your word for it? You're not fooling anyone. I've been watching you since we boarded. You keep checking that bag like you're worried someone will find out what's inside." "Well, I'm not afraid to call you out." Linda stepped between Karen and Tom, trying to act as a barrier. Her voice was firm. "That's enough. Please, ma'am, you need to return to your seat now. If you continue to disrupt the flight, I will have to involve the captain." The confrontation had drawn the attention of most of the passengers. Some leaned into the aisle to get a better view, while others whispered to their neighbors, speculating about what was happening. Tom remained seated, his expression calm, his hands resting on his book. He knew any move he made could be misinterpreted, could escalate the situation even more. Karen ignored Linda, her eyes still locked on Tom. "I'm not going to sit down until someone does something. If no one's going to listen, I'll make sure they know what's happening here." Her voice rose with each word, her face flushed with anger. Linda turned to Tom, her voice lower, almost pleading. "Sir, I'm sorry, but could you please show her the contents of your bag? Maybe if she sees there's nothing to worry about, this can all be resolved peacefully." Tom looked at Linda, then at Karen, whose face was set in a determined scowl. He took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "Fine, if it helps keep the peace." He reached down, unzipped his carry-on bag, and carefully pulled out a small, clear plastic case containing his medication. He held it up for Karen and Linda to see. "This is what's in my bag," Tom said, his voice steady. "It's medication. I have a heart condition, and I need to keep this with me at all times." Linda nodded, relieved. "There, you see? There's nothing dangerous here." She turned to Karen. "Please, let's put this behind us and finish the flight peacefully." But Karen's face twisted in disbelief. She shook her head, stepping closer to Tom. No, that's not it. That can't be everything. You're lying. You have to be." Tom's calm demeanor didn't change. "Ma'am, I'm not lying. This is the truth. Please sit down." Karen's eyes darted around, searching for support among the other passengers. "Can't you all see? He's trying to trick us. This isn't right. We have to search him properly." Linda stepped forward, her voice firm. "Ma'am, that's enough. Please sit down now, or I will have to take further action." Karen ignored her, reaching out as if to grab Tom's bag. Before she could, Tom gently but firmly took her wrist, stopping her. His grip was firm, but his expression remained calm. "Ma'am, please don't do this. There's no need for this kind of behavior." Karen yanked her hand back, her eyes wide. "You're all in on it, aren't you? You're all protecting him. She backed away, her voice rising in hysteria. Linda quickly motioned to another flight attendant who moved toward them. Ma'am, please come with us. We need to have a word with you at the back of the plane. Karen hesitated, looking around at the faces staring at her. Some sympathetic, others disapproving. She looked back at Tom, still convinced that he was a threat. But faced with no support and the firm resolve of the flight attendants, she reluctantly turned and followed them toward the back of the plane, her steps slow and hesitant. Tom watched her go, feeling the eyes of the passengers on him. He picked up his book again, trying to find his place. The tension in the cabin was thick, the whispers loud. But Tom kept his focus on the page, refusing to let the situation get to him. He had handled worse before. As Linda escorted Karen away, she glanced back at Tom, giving him a slight nod of thanks. He nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of the tension they were both managing. He knew this wasn't over yet, but for now, the immediate threat of escalation had passed. Tom turned the page, his face a mask of calm, as the plane flew steadily through the clouds, heading west. The atmosphere in the cabin was tense, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. Passengers had resumed their seats, but many still glanced toward the back of the plane where Karen had been escorted. The murmur of voices was louder now, filled with speculation and concern. Tom could feel the weight of the stares on him, but he kept his eyes on his book, maintaining his calm exterior. At the back of the plane, Karen sat in a seat reserved for the flight crew, her arms crossed, her face flushed with anger. Linda stood beside her, trying to reason with her, but Karen's mind was made up. Her voice, although hushed, carried a tone of indignation. I'm telling you, he's lying. He has to be. People like him always have a story, always have an excuse, Karen insisted, her words sharp. Linda kept her voice low, soothing. Ma'am, I understand that you are concerned, but Mr. Johnson showed us his medication. There is no indication that he's a threat. Please try to calm down. We need to ensure everyone's safety. And right now, your behavior is causing more alarm than anything else. Karen shook her head, her eyes burning with frustration. You don't get it. You don't see it. He's dangerous, I know it. And if you won't do something, I will. Linda sighed, realizing that reasoning with Karen was futile. She nodded to Jim, the other flight attendant, who stood nearby, ready to assist. Ma'am, we need to make sure you stay calm for the rest of the flight. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement when we land. Karen's eyes widened and she leaned back in her seat, silent for a moment. Then she muttered under her breath, You'll regret not listening to me. Linda decided to leave Karen with Jim and move back down the aisle. She needed to check on the other passengers, reassure them, and make sure things didn't escalate further. As she approached Tom, she noticed the way other passengers quickly looked away, pretending not to have been staring. Linda stopped next to Tom, who looked up from his book. Mr. Johnson, Linda said quietly, I apologize for the disturbance. Is there anything you need? Tom shook his head. No, thank you. I understand these things happen. I appreciate how you're handling it. Linda hesitated, then spoke softly so only Tom could hear. I just wanted to make sure there's no misunderstanding. If you need anything, please let us know. We want to ensure your comfort and safety, as well as everyone else's. Tom nodded, sensing her sincerity. Thank you. I just want to get to Los Angeles without any more trouble. Linda gave a small smile and continued down the aisle, checking on other passengers. Tom watched her go, then turned his attention back to his book, trying to regain his focus. But the tension in the cabin made it difficult. He could feel the eyes on him, the whispers that followed Linda's conversation with Karen. He knew he had to say something, do something, to ease the growing unease. Tom looked around, gauging the mood. He took a deep breath and then stood up, carefully setting his book on his seat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his badge. It wasn't something he liked to do, but he knew it might be the only way to defuse the situation. He walked down the aisle, stopping at Linda's side, his voice calm, but loud enough for those around to hear. Excuse me, may I have everyone's attention for a moment? The cabin quieted, passengers turning to look at him. Tom held up his badge, showing it clearly. My name is Detective Tom Johnson. I'm an undercover police detective with the New York Police Department. I've been on assignment, and the medication in my bag is for a heart condition. I apologize if my behavior caused any concern, but I assure you there is no threat here. There was a moment of stunned silence. Some passengers looked relieved, others surprised. A few exchanged glances, nodding slowly. Tom's calm, authoritative demeanor seemed to put many at ease. He turned to Linda, who gave him a small nod of thanks, appreciating his effort to calm things down. But the silence was broken by Karen's voice, loud and indignant, from the back of the plane. You're lying. This is just a cover. How do we know that badge is real? How do we know you're not using it to smuggle something dangerous? Tom turned to face her, his expression steady. Ma'am, if you'd like, you can call my department and verify my identity. The number is on the back of the badge. I'm not here to cause harm. I'm just trying to do my job and get to my destination safely. Karen's face was flushed, her eyes wide with anger. No, I don't believe you. This is all a trick. You can't fool me. The tension in the cabin started to rise again. Tom saw the fear in Karen's eyes, the panic that had taken hold of her. He knew that nothing he said would convince her, but he also knew he had to keep calm, keep things under control. Ma'am, Tom said softly, I understand you're scared, but I promise you there's nothing to fear from me. Let's just finish this flight without any more trouble. When we land, you are welcome to have the authorities verify everything. Karen shook her head, her breathing rapid, her voice trembling. No, I won't wait. I won't sit here and do nothing while you, her voice trailed off, her words failing her. Linda stepped forward, her voice firm. Ma'am, please sit down. We've spoken with Mr. Johnson. Everything is under control. We need you to stay calm. Karen looked around, seeing the other passengers watching her, some with concern, others with disapproval. She realized she had no support, no allies in this. Slowly, she sank back into her seat, still shaking her head. Tom watched her for a moment, then turned back to Linda. Thank you, he said quietly. He walked back to his seat, feeling the eyes on him but ignoring them. He sat down, picked up his book, and opened it, but his mind was far from the pages. The flight continued in silence for a few minutes, the tension still thick but no longer teetering on the edge of chaos. Passengers began to relax, turning back to their movies, books, and conversations. Linda moved quietly through the cabin, ensuring everyone was settled, her eyes occasionally glancing toward Tom and Karen, ready to step in if needed. Karen sat at the back, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. She felt the weight of everyone's eyes, the judgment in their stares. She couldn't understand why they didn't see what she saw, why they trusted Tom's words, but she couldn't fight anymore. She was alone in her fear, and for now she had no choice but to wait until they landed. Tom sat quietly, his eyes on his book, but his mind was alert, aware of the slightest movement around him. He knew this wasn't over, but he hoped the worst was behind them. He focused on breathing steadily, keeping his heart rate down, staying calm. There were still hours left in the flight, and anything could happen. The cabin of Flight 287 was still tense after Tom's revelation. While some passengers had settled back into their routines, others continued to cast wary glances toward him in the back of the plane, where Karen sat, isolated and seething. The murmur of conversation was low, hushed, as if people were afraid of reigniting the tension that had filled the air moments earlier. Linda moved carefully through the aisles, offering reassurances to those who needed them, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. She could feel the unease, like a ripple spreading out from the back of the plane where Karen sat, her eyes burning with frustration and disbelief. Linda knew she had to keep the situation contained. She couldn't let things escalate any further. At the rear of the cabin, Jim kept a watchful eye on Karen. She sat with her arms crossed, her face a mask of stubborn defiance. Jim had dealt with difficult passengers before, but there was something different about this. The intensity of Karen's fear and anger was unsettling. He leaned over to Linda as she approached, his voice low. She's still agitated, Jim said quietly. I don't think she's going to calm down anytime soon. Linda nodded, glancing over at Karen. I know. We need to make sure she doesn't cause any more disturbances. Can you stay with her and try to keep her calm? I'll check in with the captain and see if we need to take any additional precautions. Jim nodded. I'll do my best. Linda made her way to the front of the plane, entering the cockpit. Captain Samuel Harris turned in his seat, his expression serious. What's the situation, Linda? He asked. We've managed to calm things down for now, Linda replied. But the woman Karen is still agitated. She doesn't believe Tom is telling the truth, even though he's shown his badge and explained everything. I'm concerned she might try something else. The captain frowned. We can't afford another outburst. It could cause a panic. If necessary, we may need to restrain her to ensure the safety of all passengers. Linda nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I'll keep an eye on her. Jim's with her now, trying to keep her calm. We'll do everything we can to avoid using restraints, but we'll be ready if it comes to that. Captain Harris gave a slight nod. Keep me updated. If things get out of hand, we'll notify air traffic control and have security waiting when we land. Linda left the cockpit, her mind racing with contingency plans. She had to keep Karen calm and prevent any more incidents. She made her way back to the rear of the plane, where Jim stood guard near Karen's seat. Karen looked up as Linda approached, her eyes flashing with defiance. So, are you here to apologize? To admit that I'm right? Linda shook her head, keeping her voice gentle but firm. No, ma'am, I'm here to make sure you're okay. We need everyone to stay calm and cooperative so we can reach our destination safely. Karen's jaw tightened. Cooperative? You mean compliant? You want me to just sit here and do nothing while that man carries out whatever plan he has? I won't do it. I can't believe you're all falling for his lies. Linda took a deep breath. Mr. Johnson is not lying. He's shown his credentials, and there's nothing to suggest he's a threat. Your behavior, however, is causing concern among other passengers. We need you to remain calm and stay in your seat. If you can't do that, we'll have to take further measures. Karen's eyes widened. Further measures? What are you going to do, arrest me? I'm the one trying to keep everyone safe. Linda met Karen's gaze steadily. Ma'am, we're responsible for the safety of all passengers on this flight. If you continue to cause a disturbance, we will have to restrain you for the remainder of the flight. Please just stay calm and remain seated. Karen glared at Linda, but something in her tone must have struck a chord. She leaned back in her seat, still fuming, but her voice dropped. Fine, but if something happens, it's on you, all of you. Linda nodded, relieved that Karen seemed to be complying, at least for now. She signaled to Jim to keep watch and then returned to her duties, checking on passengers, offering smiles and reassurances. The tension in the cabin was still thick, but it was no longer on the verge of boiling over. As Linda moved down the aisle, Tom watched her approach. He had been quietly observing the situation from his seat, aware of every movement and every shift in the cabin's atmosphere. He could see the strain on Linda's face, the way her eyes flickered between him and the back of the plane. When she reached his seat, he looked up, his expression calm. How's it going back there? Tom asked softly. Linda sighed. She's still upset, but she's staying in her seat for now. We're keeping a close watch. I'm sorry this has caused you so much trouble. We're doing our best to manage the situation. Tom nodded. I know you are. You're handling it well. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Linda gave him a small smile. Just stay calm. The less we escalate, the better. Tom returned to his book, but his senses were on high alert. He could feel the tension still lingering in the air, a subtle undercurrent that threatened to resurface at any moment. He knew this wasn't over, but he hoped that things would stay quiet until they landed. At the back of the plane, Karen sat rigidly in her seat, her mind racing. She couldn't believe that everyone had sided with Tom, that they couldn't see the danger she saw so clearly. Her anger simmered, but she kept it contained, knowing that any further outburst would only make things worse for her. Jim stood nearby, watching Karen closely. He could see the turmoil in her eyes, the way her hands gripped the armrests as if she was holding herself back from doing something drastic. He remained ready, prepared to step in if needed. Minutes passed, turning into an hour. The flight settled into a tense rhythm, passengers quietly attending to their own activities. Linda continued her rounds, keeping an eye on both Tom and Karen, aware that she was the thin line keeping the peace. Finally, Linda approached Jim and nodded. I think we're okay for now, she whispered. Just keep watch and let me know if anything changes. Jim nodded, his eyes never leaving Karen. Will do. Linda turned to walk away, her mind still focused on maintaining control. She knew the situation could flare up again at any moment, but for now they were managing. The plane continued its journey through the sky, carrying its passengers toward their destination, each one hoping the tension would not resurface. In her seat, Karen continued to fume, her thoughts circling back to Tom and the threat she believed he posed. But for now, at least, she remained silent, her anger simmering below the surface, waiting for another spark. And Tom, though outwardly calm, remained vigilant, knowing that his ability to stay composed was key to keeping the peace. The hours stretched on, and the flight continued, with everyone on board hoping for a smooth landing, both literally and figuratively. The plane began its descent, and the seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding. Captain Harris's voice came over the intercom, calm and reassuring, announcing their approach to Los Angeles. Passengers shifted in their seats, some stretching, others packing away laptops and books in preparation for landing. The tension that had hovered over the cabin for most of the flight seemed to lighten as people prepared for the journey's end. Tom Johnson felt the plane tilt slightly as it began its descent. He closed his book and tucked it back into his carry-on bag, making sure his medication was safely secured. He glanced briefly toward the back of the plane where Karen sat, still under the watchful eye of Jim. She hadn't made another outburst, but Tom could tell by her rigid posture and the way her eyes darted around that she was far from calm. Linda made one last walk down the aisle, checking that passengers were buckled in and ready for landing. She paused briefly at Tom's seat, offering a smile. "We're almost there," she said quietly. "Thank you for your patience." Tom nodded. "I just want to get through this without any more issues. You've handled everything well." Linda returned the nod, appreciating his calm demeanor. "Let's hope things stay quiet until we're on the ground." As Linda continued down the aisle, she noticed Jim signaling her. She quickened her pace, her heart sinking slightly. When she reached the back, Jim leaned in, his voice low. "Karen's been muttering to herself. She's agitated again. We need to be ready in case she tries something." Linda glanced at Karen, who was staring straight ahead, her face flushed with frustration. Linda knelt beside her, keeping her voice soft. "Ma'am, we're about to land. I need you to stay calm and remain in your seat. We're almost there." Karen's eyes flicked to Linda, her voice a harsh whisper. "This isn't over. I'm not letting him get away with whatever he's planning. You'll see. You'll all see." Linda felt a chill but forced herself to smile. "Please, just stay seated until we land. Everything will be addressed when we're on the ground." Karen didn't respond, but she didn't make any moves to get up either. Linda took a deep breath and returned to her station, signaling Jim to keep a close eye on Karen. The plane continued its descent, the city of Los Angeles coming into view below. Linda hoped that once they landed, everything would go smoothly. As the plane touched down, there was a collective sigh of relief from the passengers. The usual sounds of unbuckling seatbelts and the rustling of bags filled the cabin. Tom remained seated, knowing there was no rush. He waited as other passengers stood and began retrieving their luggage from the overhead compartments. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Harris's voice echoed through the intercom, "welcome to Los Angeles. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off and the aircraft has come to a complete stop at its gate. We appreciate your cooperation and hope you have a pleasant stay." Tom felt the plane taxiing to the gate. He glanced out the window, watching the airport crew preparing for their arrival. Linda moved toward him, her face calm but focused. "We've contacted airport security. They'll be waiting when we reach the gate," she said softly. Tom nodded. "That's probably for the best. Thank you." As the plane came to a halt and the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers stood up, eager to disembark. Linda and Jim positioned themselves near Karen, ready to intervene if necessary. Tom stayed in his seat, knowing he would be among the last to leave. He could hear the murmur of voices, a mix of relief and curiosity. The cabin door opened, and a pair of uniformed security officers stepped inside. Linda motioned them toward the back where Karen sat. One of the officers, a tall man with a calm demeanor, approached Karen, speaking in a low, authoritative tone. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. We'd like to have a word with you about the incident during the flight." Karen's eyes widened, and she shook her head. "No, I'm not going anywhere. I haven't done anything wrong. It's him. He's the one you should be arresting." She pointed wildly in Tom's direction. The officer remained calm. "Ma'am, we just need to speak with you. If you could please come with us, we can sort everything out." Karen stood up abruptly, her voice rising. "You're all in on it. You're protecting him. I'm the only one who sees the truth." The second officer, a woman with a firm grip, gently but firmly took Karen's arm. "Ma'am, we need you to calm down. Please come with us, and we'll handle everything appropriately." Karen tried to pull away, her voice turning into a shrill cry. "No, this isn't right. You can't do this." The officers, maintaining their composure, guided Karen toward the exit, her protests echoing through the cabin. Passengers watched in silence, some looking shocked, others relieved that the situation was being handled. Linda followed closely, ensuring that everything was under control. Tom remained seated, watching as Karen was let off the plane. He could feel the eyes of other passengers on him, but he ignored them, focusing instead on the steady professionalism of the officers. Linda returned to his side after a moment, her expression a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "They'll take her to a holding area for questioning," Linda explained quietly. "We've also informed the authorities about the situation, so everything will be checked thoroughly." Tom nodded. "Thank you. You've handled everything with professionalism. I appreciate it." Linda gave a small smile. "Just doing my job. I'm glad we were able to get through this without more problems." As the last of the passengers began to disembark, Tom stood, retrieving his carry-on bag. He moved down the aisle, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. He nodded to Linda one last time before stepping off the plane, the cool air of the jet bridge hitting him as he walked toward the terminal. In the terminal, Tom saw Karen being escorted by the security officers, still arguing, her voice echoing off the walls. He watched as they guided her toward a secure area, her protests fading as she was taken out of sight. Tom turned and headed toward the baggage claim, his steps steady. The events of the flight played over in his mind, but he knew he had handled them as best as he could. He had faced worse situations in his line of work, but the weight of being unjustly accused still lingered. As he reached the baggage claim area, Tom took a deep breath, ready to move on from the day's events. Behind him, the passengers of Flight 287 filtered out, talking quietly among themselves, some glancing in the direction Karen had been taken. The tension of the flight was dissipating, replaced by the bustle of the airport and the anticipation of arriving in a new city. For Tom, the day wasn't over. He knew there would be reports to file, questions to answer, and reflections to make. But for now, he was content to let the noise of the airport wash over him, a reminder that life moved on, even after moments of conflict and misunderstanding. As he walked toward the exit, Tom felt a sense of resolve. Today had been challenging, but he had faced it with dignity and professionalism. And in the end, that was all anyone could do.